No siren, no press conference. At exactly 2:14 a.m., the order was signed, missiles launched eastward without congressional approval, without public debate, without even a whisper of hesitation. One man's command lit up foreign skies, but it was one woman's words that set America on fire. While the world scrambled to identify targets, while cable anchors whispered about limited strikes and decisive leadership, one sheet of paper landed in the hands of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. No entourage, no dramatic lighting, just a printer-smudged copy of the War Powers resolution and a note. They skipped the process. Don't skip the law. At sunrise, she walked into the hearing room, face unreadable, and read aloud 13 words, just 13, that pulled the emergency brake on an entire war machine. The room froze. The cameras didn't blink, because in those seconds, the air shifted, not with panic, but with reckoning. This story is a dramatization, but the law she read is real. The fear was real, and so is the question she raised, one that no missile can silence. Who gave you the right to erase Congress with a signature? If you've ever wondered whether a whisper can stand against war drums, stay, because this time, the loudest force in Washington wasn't the man with the codes. It was a woman with the Constitution, and the nation listened. At 2:14 a.m. Tehran time, the sky didn't just light up, it cracked open. From a satellite orbiting 22,000 miles above Earth, 3 points on the Iranian map suddenly blazed like signal flares from hell. Natanz, Iraq, Fordow. Facilities once buried beneath concrete, sand, and deniability now pulsed white-hot on military feeds. The thermal spikes weren't anomalies, they were confirmation. At that exact second, the United States had executed its most aggressive unilateral strike in a generation. The decision hadn't passed through Congress. No debate, no vote, not even a late-night text to senior leadership. It had passed through one man, alone. A man with access to a touchscreen, not a constitutional mandate. President Trump had given the order. No advisors in the room. Just him, the glow of a classified briefing, and a signature line that read, "Authorization, immediate engagement." A tap, a swipe, history rewritten by a finger. At Edwards Air Force Base, the hangar doors slid open with the silence of steel teeth. Two B-2 spirits, ghost-like in the dark, began their glide. Pilots didn't know full mission details, only that their targets were nuclear, hardened, and non-negotiable. Refueling orders had been cleared 12 hours earlier under an unscheduled readiness test, a lie that had already left the tarmac. Meanwhile, the rest of the world woke up not by accident, but by impact. First came the leaks, encrypted satellite flashes intercepted by defense analysts in Tel Aviv, a burst of code from Turkish radar systems. Then, 30 minutes after the blast, a photo, grainy, black and white, began circulating on the dark web, a mushroom of smoke over Iraq's heavy water facility. By 3 a.m., it hit Twitter. This is war. Joshua Congress was sleeping. By 3:14, it was trending in 37 countries. Tokyo's stock market froze mid-opening. Paris called an emergency session. The Kremlin released a 5-word statement. This was not collective action. The British Prime Minister, still in pajamas, requested clarification. But America had none to give, because America didn't know. There had been no press conference, no notification to the Senate Intelligence Committee, not even a midnight call to the Speaker of the House. Just bombs. The decision had bypassed every elected check, every constitutional gatekeeper. And Americans, they were asleep until their phones lit up in sync with distant fire. In Queens, a college student checking weather alerts accidentally stumbled onto a breaking banner. U.S. strikes Iranian nuclear sites, no congressional approval. In Boston, a public high school teacher rewrote her morning lesson to say, "What does democracy look like when war starts in silence?" In Austin, a woman 3 months pregnant turned to her husband and asked the question every generation learns too late to ask. Did we just start a war without knowing it? Meanwhile, inside a silent Capitol, a 24-year-old staffer working late in a budget subcommittee noticed a redacted operations file buried beneath routine energy appropriations. It read, "Operation Falcon Talon, execution verified, no timestamp." No author, no legal grounding. Just confirmation of something irreversible. By sunrise, the world's media had transformed into a swarm. MSNBC cut their rerun to go live. Fox News scrambled to define it as limited engagement. CNN simply repeated the same sentence. No congressional authorization was requested. Outside the White House, the protest began not with shouting, but with questions scribbled on cardboard. Who decides? Is this democracy? Where was the vote? And far from the cameras, in a small apartment in Queens, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat alone. She hadn't slept. A stack of law books towered beside a single cup of untouched coffee. The War Powers Resolution lay open on her lap. Her fingers had traced the same clause for hours. The constitutional powers of the president as commander-in-chief do not extend to declaring war. The country had watched missiles fly. She was watching the law fall. She didn't shout. She didn't tweet. She quietly pulled out a Sharpie and underlined 13 words, then wrote a note to her chief of staff. They forgot the Constitution. Let's remind them. Because while some leaders launch war from a touchscreen, others load their weapons with truth. And that morning, the only explosion Washington hadn't seen coming was the one sparked by a voice too calm to ignore. 2:41 a.m. The Capitol was asleep, but one office window on the east side still glowed like a signal. Inside, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat at her desk. No camera crew, no podium, no applause. Just her, a half-empty mug of coffee gone cold, and the original printed text of the War Powers Resolution of 1973, its corners marked with ink smudges, highlights, and exhaustion. Her desk was not a battlefield, but tonight it felt like one. Around her were the quiet ruins of a long night. Draft speeches, half-written, news alerts pinging unanswered, a legal textbook cracked open to a page she'd read 5 times already. But her focus never wavered, because this wasn't just about foreign policy. This was about what makes power legitimate and what makes it dangerous. One yellow Post-it note sat on the edge of her keyboard. It was short. 4 words. They'll skip process. Don't skip response. She didn't need a war room. She didn't need a press team. What she needed was already in her hands. She flipped back to Section 5B of the War Powers Act. Her eyes landed again on the same sentence she had underlined a dozen times tonight, this time slower, as if absorbing it through skin. The constitutional powers of the president as commander-in-chief do not extend to declaring war. Outside, sirens wailed somewhere in the distance. Maybe unrelated, maybe not. The news hadn't stopped flooding her inbox. Iran confirmed civilian casualties. Tel Aviv on high alert. NATO blindsided. Congressional leadership left in the dark. Cable networks screaming contradictions. But here, in this room, there was no screaming. Just the steady, controlled breath of a woman who knew history didn't only turn on bombs, it also turned on paragraphs. She took a breath, then another, then leaned forward, pulled her laptop closer, and opened a blank email. To entire staff list. Subject: immediate response. Her fingers didn't hesitate. No one asked us. No one warned us. No one gave Congress the dignity of a vote. But tonight we don't respond with panic. We don't respond with fury. We respond with law. Find me the 13th words, the clause, the precedent. America must be reminded. The Constitution was not paused tonight, and neither are we. She hit send. It was 2:41 a.m. In another office across the Capitol, her chief of staff saw it first. Then a policy aide in Brooklyn. Then the intern who'd only been on the job 3 weeks, but still replied, on it. In 30 minutes, her inbox lit up like a switchboard. Court rulings, past resolutions, archived votes, legal memos from decades before she was born. But none of it would matter if the country didn't listen. And the country wouldn't listen unless someone said what no one else had the nerve to. So she stood up. She walked to the window. Outside, Washington glistened in silence, unaware that missiles had rewritten foreign policy and that she was preparing to rewrite the response. Not with outrage, with structure, not with sound bites, with statute. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from a reporter. Did you know about the strike? She typed one word back. No. Then she added, but I know what's still binding. The Constitution. In a city built on noise, AOC had chosen clarity. In a moment dominated by firepower, she had chosen law. And while a president gambled global peace on a midnight signature, she chose to stake her country's soul on 13 words printed on a yellowing sheet of paper. Because history may remember who launched the first missile, but it never forgets who read the fine print. The sun rose, but it didn't bring light. Only smoke, screens, and silence. By 7:02 a.m., the global markets had begun to spiral. Oil surged past $150 a barrel. The Nikkei fell 800 points in 15 minutes. European banks froze energy trades before breakfast. Traders whispered what journalists wouldn't yet say. Did we just start a war? Iran's foreign ministry called it an act of naked aggression. Their supreme leader released a statement. The American people may not have chosen this, but we know who did. Moments later, Tehran's military broadcast a direct vow of retaliation. Within days, not weeks. But back in Washington, on the south lawn of the White House, none of that showed. Donald Trump stood at the podium, flanked by generals. He wore his trademark red tie, slightly loosened as if to appear casual, controlled, dominant. Cameras clicked like gunfire. We acted with precision, he declared. We neutralized a threat. This was decisive leadership. History will vindicate this moment. No mention of Congress, no mention of oversight, no mention of the law. Only the word decisive, repeated 5 times in 7 minutes. And then, the signature phrase that would trend for the next 24 hours. Real presidents don't wait for permission. But on the other side of the city, someone had. 8:03 a.m., Capitol Hill. No entourage, no speechwriters, no flashbulbs. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stepped out of her car in a stark black blazer, her expression unreadable, her stride deliberate. She didn't look like someone attending a press event. She looked like someone preparing to unearth the truth, piece by piece, clause by clause. In her hand, one sheet of paper. No folder, no briefing book. Just one page, folded once down the middle. It wasn't a press release, it was a law. As she entered the Capitol, a few junior reporters spotted her and moved to intercept. She didn't stop, didn't smile, didn't speak. The only sound was the quiet thud of her heels echoing down the marble hall, and the low vibration of text being exchanged in real time. AOC just walked in, alone, carrying something. She's not with leadership. Something's up. You think she's going to speak? If she does, it's not for the cameras. Upstairs, the Oversight Committee hadn't even convened. Most members were still scrambling to get updates from their own staff, some stunned to find out about the strike from Twitter. Meanwhile, MSNBC had already pivoted its chyron. Markets tumble as White House defends strike. Below it, a second headline flickered. Where was Congress? And somewhere in the mess of noise and speculation, someone finally noticed what AOC was carrying. A legal analyst posted a blurry photo of her entering the chamber and zoomed in. The paper was yellowed at the edges, slightly creased. Then they enhanced the image. You could just barely make out the title, War Powers Resolution of 1973, Section 5B. Within 20 minutes, the post had 2.3 million views. Hashtags were reborn. Who signs for where? Just read the clause. Just 13 words. In the middle of chaos, amid leaders ducking for cover or deflecting blame, one woman wasn't shouting. She was walking with purpose, with law, with history folded in her palm. She didn't need to claim the moral high ground. She was standing on it. And even before she said a word, the nation was already listening. At 9:12 a.m., the House Committee on Foreign Affairs was called into emergency session. No coffee, no gavel, no script. Just buzzed cell phones, late briefings, and a tension so thick it bent the air. The hearing room was packed to the walls, congressional aides lining the perimeter, cameras jockeying for angles, press passes flashing like badges of war. C-SPAN scrambled a second live feed. CNN was already calling it a moment that may define this presidency. Chairman Watkins, a staunch Trump loyalist, opened with a thin smile and a thunderous sentence. This was a strike for freedom, and freedom never waits for permission. A ripple of applause from the Republican bench. A few claps too long, too loud. Across the aisle, AOC sat still, eyes locked forward, no notes, just the same sheet of paper, now slightly curled from that morning. Members took turns speaking, each lining up behind a phrase as if it were a shield. Preemptive defense, American strength, no time for bureaucracy. Representative Calden from Florida called it a masterstroke. Senator Beale, streaming in remotely, dubbed it the moment America remembered its backbone. Then came a voice clear and firm from the minority table. Requesting 5 minutes, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. The room shifted. One aide dropped a pen. Another leaned in, whispering behind her palm, "This is where the real war starts." The chair hesitated, but protocol couldn't block the ask. 5 minutes granted. The countdown began. Cameras swiveled. Boom mics lowered. Journalists stopped tweeting. AOC stood. No podium, no theatrics. Just her, the microphone, and a room that had forgotten what accountability sounded like. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the law. "Mr. Chairman, colleagues, you've praised a strike no one here approved. You've applauded an action none of us were briefed on. And while some call that strength, I call it what our Constitution does, a violation." A few murmurs, some shifting in chairs. She held up the paper. "This is Section 5B of the War Powers Resolution of 1973. It says, and I quote, 'The President, in every possible instance, shall consult with Congress before introducing United States armed forces into hostilities.' That clause wasn't written for decoration. It was written for days like today. The air thickened. Even the clicking of camera shutters slowed. You didn't get a call. I didn't get a call. The American people didn't get a call. But the missiles flew anyway. And now we're being asked to clap after the curtain's already dropped." On the wall behind her, the seal of the United States seemed to loom larger, as if listening. She continued, "This hearing didn't begin with a question. It began with a celebration. That's not oversight. That's complicity dressed as patriotism. And history has always punished that kind of silence." A pause, one beat, two. Then she lowered the paper and finished with a line that would be played, looped, and tattooed across the internet within hours. "If war begins without Congress, then it begins without democracy." Silence. Chairman Watkins shuffled his papers, visibly shaken. A few aides exchanged glances. Reporters began typing furiously. One whispered into his mic, "We're witnessing a seismic shift." Across the country, the video began to spread before she even sat down. "War without vote. Rush 5 minutes. That shook the Hill. Shock Ocasio clause." In the hallway afterward, she refused interviews. One staffer asked if she wanted to review talking points for the afternoon. She shook her head. "We already said what mattered. Now let them scramble." What came next wasn't applause. It was recalculation. Both parties, the press, even voters. Because in a room full of noise, she didn't shout. She cited. She reminded a country what checks and balances sound like. And she reminded a president what happens when you ignore them. She didn't rush. She didn't shout. She rose. Amid the echo of chest-beating statements and the diplomatic fog of necessary force, one woman stood quietly, with something no missile could rival: the Constitution of the United States. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez walked to the center of the hearing room, not with a speech, but with a document. Not with emotion, but with 13 words that carried more explosive power than any bomb dropped the night before. She held it up, not like a weapon, but like a mirror. "Congress," she began, her voice steady, her tone flat, "shall have power to declare war." That was it, those 13 words. And then, dead silence. The cameras froze. The press stopped typing. The room that had been roaring with theories, justifications, political posturing, and patriotic theater fell into a vacuum. Rubio blinked. J.D. Vance looked down at his own copy of the Constitution like he was seeing it for the first time. Even Chairman Watkins leaned back, hand twitching at his pen, but not writing a thing. Because in that moment, it wasn't about Trump. It wasn't about Iran. It was about the law and who had just broken it. She didn't explain the quote. She didn't need to. Every American student had memorized it in civics class, but only now, under the fluorescent lights of a congressional hearing, did it sound like a warning. She folded the page slowly, deliberately, and laid it on the table in front of her, as if to say, "This is the line you crossed, and here's the proof." Then she looked around. She didn't call names, didn't assign blame, but her eyes stopped, long enough, on each Republican who had applauded hours earlier, and they squirmed. Because this wasn't opinion, it wasn't spin, it was law. 13 she said. 13 words that should have stopped missiles. But instead, those words got skipped like they were optional. No one interrupted. The shift was visible. The tension had morphed. It was no longer about patriotism. It was about process. It was no longer about who cheered louder. It was about who had obeyed the document on which their jobs, their titles, their oaths were based. If a president can declare war without Congress, then Congress is a prop. And if Congress is a prop, then every vote cast here becomes theater, and democracy becomes a lie wrapped in noise. A gasp. Maybe two, but no denials, and she wasn't done. "I'm not here to debate strategy. I'm here to remind you that strategy without legality is just arrogance in uniform." One by one, staffers began typing again. News alerts flashed across networks. Breaking, AOC quotes, "Constitution in shock hearing. Moment, 13 words. Trends worldwide in under 6 minutes. Constitution becomes most downloaded government document overnight." Even Trump's press team, watching from an adjacent office, reportedly scrambled for legal consultants, unsure whether this was just a viral moment or the first step in a constitutional showdown. She stepped back from the mic, not with flourish, but with finality. Not a mic drop, but a trigger reset. And then she sat. Behind her, another representative muttered under his breath, "That wasn't a quote. That was a detonation." And it was. Because war is loud, but law is permanent. Bombs fall, but documents stay. And that day, 13 words did more than start an argument. They stopped the momentum of an entire narrative. They pierced through the fog of emergency powers and strong leadership and forced a nation to ask, if you didn't follow the rules to start this war, how can we trust you to end it? In homes across America, classrooms paused to discuss what she had just said. Civics teachers pulled up the War Powers Resolution. Veterans groups issued statements, not about the strike, but about the process. That night, a 9th grade student in Michigan created a TikTok with the caption, "AOC just proved one thing. The strongest weapon isn't a bomb. It's a boundary that still means something." By midnight, the post had over 12 million views, and as one political analyst later summed it up, "She didn't read the Constitution, she reactivated it." He hadn't spoken in years, not like this, not with fire. Representative Richard Hanley, a 76-year-old Democrat from West Virginia, decorated veteran, longtime committee member, and the man who once cast the deciding vote for the Iraq invasion, stood up, trembling not with age, but with rage. "I authorized Iraq. I won't stay silent again." The room froze again, but this time, it wasn't because of law. It was because of guilt. Because if he, the man who had seen intelligence briefings, who had sat across from generals, who had buried regrets under ribbons, was breaking the silence, then something real had just broken through. Behind him, a Republican aide shut off the live feed. Too late, the clip had already bounced from one Twitter account to another like a political virus. Less than 2 minutes later, phones in the chamber buzzed. AOC's reading had already hit 4.7 million views. Hanley's words, clipped, captioned, amplified, began trending within 10. A new wave of hashtags erupted. Nashash AOC 13 words. Yarn, read before you bomb. Ryu, where is Congress outside the Capitol? Protesters who had been gathering in silent tension suddenly roared to life. A hand-drawn sign rose above the crowd. She read. He listened. Now we act. Then another. Where's our vote? Where's the law? And then the chants came. Not my war. Not without a vote. The sound was thunder, uncoordinated, furious, organic. By noon, major news anchors dropped their pre-written commentary and began narrating the moment in real time. This isn't about Iran anymore, one declared on live TV. This is about the Constitution. This is about whether war still needs permission in America. Inside the hearing room, something rare happened. The partisanship cracked. One by one, members who had clapped for the strike were now quietly slipping their copies of the Constitution out from their folders, flipping pages not to make a point, but to find their footing. AOC remained seated, calm, her hands folded, not triumphant, just focused, because she hadn't come for applause. She had come for accountability. Power unchecked becomes assumption, she had once told a group of law students. An assumption in politics is the quietest path to collapse. Back in the hallway, CNN caught up with Congressman Nathan Kruger, Texas, one of Trump's closest allies. For the first time in 5 years, he dodged a question. I need to review the constitutional framework before I speak on that, he muttered, pulling his coat over his mic. That clip went viral too. Captioned, Constitution? Now you read it? In the streets of Philadelphia, a woman handed out pocket constitutions near City Hall. She wasn't a politician, she was a teacher. Her sign read, one woman, one quote, one wake-up call. And that's what it had become. Not just a legal debate, but a wake-up call to every citizen who thought Congress had become irrelevant, to every student who believed the Constitution had no teeth, to every voter who had stopped watching C-SPAN because they thought nothing ever changed. Because now they were watching, and they were angry, not because of what had been bombed overseas, but because of what had been bypassed at home. AOC's office released no statement, but her staff quietly confirmed that she had received over 11,000 emails in 3 hours. One said, I'm a Republican. I didn't vote for you, but today you reminded me why I voted all. Even Fox News had to pivot. Tucker Carlson opened his segment with, I disagree with her politics, but that moment, that was pure constitutional thunder. Inside the hearing room, the mood had shifted from defense to damage control, because now the pressure wasn't coming from across the aisle, it was coming from outside the building. That night, images circulated of a protester holding a sign in the rain. 13 words, 300 million people. One question, do we still matter? And that's what lingered, not the blast, not the press briefing, not even the president's defiance, but a single question born from one moment of unshaken calm. If Congress doesn't declare war, who does? And for once, America wasn't just listening, it was asking. In Indiana, the stadium lights burned hotter than the air. Rows of flags fluttered as the crowd erupted. It wasn't a campaign stop, it was a victory lap. Or so he thought. Donald Trump took the stage at 7:02 p.m., chest out, jaw tight, with the confidence of a man who believed history had just handed him a crown. If peace needs power, he roared into the mic, then baby, I've got plenty to spare. The crowd screamed. Fireworks burst behind him. He smirked like a man who thought he'd just saved the world. They said I needed permission? I gave myself presidential permission. That's what leaders do. And then came the punchline. World War III? Please. I just prevented it. With one strike, one signature, and 0 apologies. The audience laughed, cheered, chanted, USA, USA. What they didn't see, what most hadn't seen, was the classified memo that was already flickering on a secure laptop in Washington, D.C. 3 words at the top, for POTUS only. And below that, stamped in red, do not proceed. It came from the Pentagon, dated 12 hours before the strike. AOC's team had received it through an encrypted Dropbox, anonymous source, no traceable metadata. But the watermark was real, the language was real, the warning was unmistakable. Unilateral engagement will destabilize international nuclear posture. Advised, full congressional briefing required before execution. But that briefing never came. Instead, America got a rally, a declaration, a doctrine. Peace through power, a phrase that once belonged to cartoons and fictional despots was now being printed on buttons and bumper stickers across half the country. Back in D.C., AOC sat in silence, eyes fixed on the blinking header of the memo. She didn't speak. She didn't move. Then in the quietest voice possible, she said, He was warned. The memo wasn't just a smoking gun. It was a map of what he had ignored. Every sentence was underlined by potential consequences. Every paragraph a policy wall he bulldozed through with the confidence of a man who thought he was above the architecture of law. If this is his doctrine, her chief of staff whispered, then the Constitution just became an obstacle. Outside, the world wasn't clapping. In Tehran, thousands gathered in cemeteries. In Paris, protesters threw red paint at the American embassy. In Seoul, markets tumbled 4.7%. And in Berlin, an emergency NATO summit convened without a U.S. delegation. And yet, on stage in Indiana, Trump smiled wide. They say I skipped Congress. You're damn right I did. Because I don't answer to delay. I answer to destiny. He raised both fists. Cameras flashed. And in that moment, the image of power was complete. Loud, defiant, singular. But images crack faster than sound. That night, AOC's team began preparing a side-by-side broadcast. On the left, Trump declaring decisive leadership. On the right, the Pentagon memo's warning, highlighted, time-stamped, and leaked. Caption, he was told not to. He did it anyway. Now, who pays the price? The tweet went live at 11:14 p.m. It hit 10 million views in under 3 hours. On Reddit, veterans debated military protocol. On TikTok, teenagers reenacted the memo as a courtroom skit. On YouTube, legal scholars began dissecting the memo line by line under thumbnails that read, "War crime or just ego?" When warnings get ignored, who holds the gavel? In New York, an 8th grade teacher played both the rally clip and the memo for her civics class. A student raised her hand. If the president doesn't listen to generals and doesn't listen to Congress, who does he listen to? No one answered. Not in that room, not yet. Because what was once a headline had become a homework question. What was once a soundbite had become a civic test. In AOC, she wasn't preparing a speech. She was preparing an affidavit. Because this wasn't just about power anymore. It was about process. About whether checks and balances were decorative or decisive. And when she looked down at the memo, her pen hovered over a single line. Then she circled it. Advised, full congressional briefing required before execution. Below it, she scribbled her own words. Then what was executed wasn't just a strike, it was a breach. At precisely 7 a.m. Eastern, the congressional server crashed, not because of an attack, but because millions tried to download the same file at once. The memo was public. The one AOC's team had circled, verified, and triple-checked. The one that read, advised, full congressional briefing required before execution. At the bottom, signed, Chair, Joint Chiefs of Staff. Stamped, ignored by order of the President. And just like that, the illusion shattered. This wasn't a defensive strike. This was a decision against the legal process. And the person who pulled the trigger had done so fully warned. Within minutes, hashtags ignited like wildfire. The memo was real, overruled by Trump, provoked, not protected. The leak wasn't anonymous anymore. It was surgical, strategic. Timed to detonate right beneath the second news cycle. And leading the release? A single tweet from AOC's official account. No emojis, no exclamation points, just, when leaders bypass law, the people deserve the truth. Here it is. Attached, a PDF, linked the constitutional clause, captioned with only 3 words, read, remember, respond. By 8:15 a.m., the whistleblower had spoken, anonymously but unmistakably, in a secure video shared with select investigative journalists. The voice was altered, the face blurred. I was in the room. He was briefed. He was told this would violate the War Powers Resolution pause. The president overruled everyone, his cabinet, his military advisors, even legal counsel. This wasn't defense. This was provocation. Across America, screens blinked. Radios stuttered. Anchors abandoned scripts mid-broadcast. Universities held emergency forums. Think tanks scrambled to revise position papers prepared just the day before. Suddenly, the country wasn't just debating war. It was debating whether a president had declared one illegally. The split was fast, and it was vicious. Fox aired a full-throated defense. The president acted to protect American lives. MSNBC aired side-by-sides of the memo versus Trump's rally speech. NPR asked the quiet question, if the commander-in-chief bypasses the Constitution, what is Congress anymore? But it was the student videos that went viral first. A high school in Portland dramatized the briefing memo as a courtroom play. A law school in Georgia staged a mock impeachment hearing, live-streamed, drawing over 1.3 million viewers in 2 hours. And in one dorm room at Howard University, a student held up the memo on TikTok and said, if this were your job and you ignored this document, you'd be fired. Why is the Oval Office different? On Twitter, the debate became a war of its own. He's decisive. He's dangerous. She's grandstanding. She's upholding the law. And AOC, she didn't shout. She didn't tweet again. She didn't appear on CNN. She released one video at 11 a.m. dark background. No filter. One line. The job isn't to panic. It's to protect. And if nobody else will do it, I will. It wasn't dramatics. It was duty. Delivered with the calm of someone who didn't just react, she prepared. Then came the second shockwave. The New York Times confirmed the Pentagon memo's authenticity. The Washington Post revealed that at least 3 senior military officials had considered resigning before the strike. Reuters reported internal White House texts. This is not lawful, but he won't wait. Suddenly, this wasn't just a political scandal. This was a constitutional detour in real time. The Speaker of the House announced a closed-door meeting. Former presidents released carefully worded statements. And on Capitol Hill, a quiet momentum began to build. Not of rage, but of reckoning. Some called it treason. Others called it courage. But across the spectrum, one question thundered louder than the rest. If he was warned and he still acted, what else did he ignore? And from every classroom, newsroom, kitchen table, and war veterans forum, the echo grew. Who speaks for us if Congress doesn't? That night on the Capitol steps, a single protester held a sign. It wasn't angry, it wasn't clever. It simply read, we're not anti-war, we're anti-unchecked power. And below it, 3 hashtags. Unsure, read the memo. Reassess the question, hold the line. The missiles had fallen 72 hours ago. But the real impact? It was just landing now. In American streets, kitchens, and inboxes. From Boston to Boise, protests erupted like aftershocks. Some were loud, some silent, some lit by candlelight, others by rage. But the message was the same. Who gave him permission? In New York City, a vigil formed outside a historic courthouse downtown. Rain traced down marble columns. Hundreds gathered, not with chants, but with silence. Some held signs that read, war needs a vote. Others just stood, eyes up, phones off. And into this hush stepped AOC, not escorted, not introduced, just present. She didn't take a stage. She took a step forward. This isn't anti-military, she said, voice steady, echoing under umbrellas. This is pro-process, pro-constitution, pro-accountability. Cameras clicked. But what captured attention wasn't her soundbite, it was what happened next. An older woman in a windbreaker moved through the crowd. Quiet, purposeful. She reached AOC, pressed something into her palm, and whispered just loud enough for the front row to hear. Use this in your next speech. It's my son's. It was a dog tag. Scuffed, faded, but still legible. Sergeant Alan Ruiz, KIA, Al Anbar Province. Age 21. AOC didn't speak, didn't pose. She nodded once, gripped the tag in her fist, and stepped back into the crowd. No press release, no follow-up tweet. Just presence. But not everyone was watching the vigil. In Florida, at a rally lit by red spotlights and thundering chants of USA, Trump doubled down. He held up a newspaper, waved it like a flag. They're saying I skipped Congress. You're damn right I did, because I skipped bureaucracy to save lives. Cheers. AOC would rather debate than defend. That's what happens when you let theater kids into government. More cheers. That single tweet, AOC would rather debate than defend, went viral. But so did the image below it, her holding the dog tag. And suddenly the country split again. Not just along party lines, but between fear and frustration. Some saw strength in her restraint. Others saw weakness in her words. Some shouted, "Commander-in-Chief." Others whispered, "Checks and balances." By nightfall, veterans groups entered the arena. One letter published by a bipartisan coalition of former military officers read, "We do not question the president's right to defend the nation. We question his decision to bypass the very institution designed to represent it." Signed, Major General Thomas L. Clark, retired Rear Admiral Cynthia Harris, retired, and 42 others. On college campuses, pop-up forums appeared overnight. In churches, prayers turned to politics. On TikTok, teenagers broke down the War Powers resolution in 60 seconds or less. And everywhere, one clip kept resurfacing. The moment AOC stood at the vigil, saying 7 words, "This isn't anti-military, this is anti-autocracy." Not shouted, just stated, like fact. Back in D.C., reporters surrounded Congress members exiting emergency briefings. One shouted at a departing senator, "Do you believe what AOC said was unpatriotic?" The response came without pause. "I believe she quoted the Constitution. If that's unpatriotic now, we've got bigger problems." But perhaps the most unexpected development came from an unexpected voice. Senator John Neely Kennedy, a frequent critic of AOC, took to the Senate floor and in his thick Louisiana drawl said, "Look, I don't always agree with Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. Hell, I rarely do. But if the Constitution don't mean anything during war, it don't mean anything at all." Silence followed. And in that moment, it was clear. This wasn't just backlash. This was backbone being tested, institution by institution. By midnight, 4 national newspapers had run front pages with one shared question: who holds the power to declare war? And just below that question, the same photo reappeared. AOC standing in the rain, one fist closed, a silver tag glinting between her fingers, and the caption, "This isn't a protest, this is a reminder." They said Americans wouldn't care, that they'd scroll past the missiles like they scrolled past headlines. That silence would follow impact. They were wrong. By Monday morning, 21 million people had marched in 183 cities. From Boston to Seattle, Miami to Minneapolis, sidewalks shook not from bombs, but from boots. No single leader called for it. No central plan. It rose from group chats and grief, from classroom whispers and church pew rage, from veterans' posts and teenage live streams. Hand-painted signs waved high. "Don't draft democracy." "No bombs without ballots." "We didn't elect a king." In Los Angeles, a Korean war vet held a sign that read, "I fought for checks and balances, not blank checks and silence." In Chicago, a 16-year-old led chants barefoot with a megaphone duct taped together, shouting, "This isn't left versus right. This is power versus permission." Cable news anchors stumbled to keep pace. Some tried calling it youth unrest. Others tried coordinated dissent. But what it really was awakening. At the Capitol, barricades creaked under the press of bodies, and on the steps, AOC stood alone. No podium, no flag backdrop, just wind and truth. She held up a folded yellow sheet of legal paper. One quote written in bold Sharpie, "In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex." Dwight D. Eisenhower, 1961. Then she raised her voice. That wasn't a liberal talking. That was a 5-star general. That was a Republican. That was a president who knew that unchecked power doesn't just break laws, it breaks nations. Her words weren't a roar, but the silence they left behind? Thunderous. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Say his name." She answered, "Eisenhower warned us." Trump ignored him. Gasps. Phones lifted. Live feeds surged past 100 million combined views in under 2 hours. And then came the moment no one expected. The bells rang. All across D.C., church bells began to toll. Not for death, but for reckoning. AOC turned to face the building behind her. This house was not built to be a rubber stamp. It was built to be a brake pedal, when ambition runs red. That phrase trended within minutes. #BrakePedalDemocracy. It appeared on t-shirts, graffiti murals, a billboard in Times Square by nightfall. And while the chants roared in the streets, whispers spread in the halls of power. Behind closed Senate doors, aides leaked one simple quote from a moderate Republican. "We may not like her style, but today she's carrying the Constitution better than we are." In military forums, some veterans voiced discomfort, not at AOC's words, but at the fact they were necessary. On Reddit, a Marine simply wrote, "I didn't train for civilian leaders to skip civilian law." Meanwhile, Trump fired back in the only language he trusted: volume. At a rally in Dallas, he roared, "Look at them, marching for weakness. While our enemies build missiles, they build hashtags." But the crowd didn't match his fire. Some clapped, some paused, some looked at their phones. One banner stood out, held by a young woman in the back. "If truth is weakness, let's be unbreakable." That image, Trump yelling, banner behind him, became the week's defining photo. By Tuesday, the protests spread to military families. In Georgia, a group of Navy spouses laid roses outside a recruitment center. Each one carried a note: "Our children will serve when the law does too." And in the White House briefing room, when a reporter asked the press secretary whether the president stood by his decision, the answer came stiff: "The president believes in decisive leadership." But the follow-up question cracked the room: does he also believe in legal leadership? No answer, just shifting eyes. Back outside the Capitol, a small child tugged at AOC's sleeve. "Did you bring a microphone?" She smiled. "I didn't need to. You all already brought the voice." And with that, the chant changed, from anger to purpose, from no war to read the law, follow the law, be the law. It began not with a speech, but with a pause. Senator Mike Cartwright, a Republican from Indiana with 27 years of service and 5 re-election wins, stood in front of a hallway of reporters and said just 5 words: "This wasn't what we voted for." And just like that, the dam cracked. By noon, 4 Republican senators had issued public statements questioning the legality of Trump's unilateral strike. One referred to it as reckless adventurism. Another called it a constitutional trespass disguised as urgency. The third didn't use words, just posted an image of the Constitution highlighted in yellow. And the fourth? He named names. "I warned the president. He overrode counsel. He bypassed protocol. He ignored Congress." Within hours, cable news tickers changed color, from red alert to red division. The word splintering trended globally, as if the Senate were no longer one body but fragments under pressure. Downstairs in a marble corridor that smelled like old paper and panic, AOC requested a full congressional review of executive war powers. She didn't yell. She submitted a single-page memo titled "War by Email: Restoring Legislative Authority in Times of Crisis." It cited 9 Supreme Court precedents, 3 international treaties, and 1 unwavering sentence: "No president may substitute judgment for law." When asked by the press if this move was political, she didn't flinch. "This isn't about politics. This is about power, and whether it still belongs to the people." Outside, a protester held up a sign behind her: "We didn't vote for missiles. We voted for process." In the Senate chamber, tension calcified. Normally talkative senators now whispered between closed office doors, watching each other not as colleagues, but as jurors. One aide leaked a comment from a top GOP staffer: "We're one leaked recording away from a constitutional crisis." It wasn't paranoia. It was forecast. At 3:17 p.m., Senator J.D. Vance approached AOC during recess. He didn't posture. He didn't smile. He simply said, "This is going to destroy him." She looked up from her binder. "That's not my goal." "Doesn't matter," Vance replied. "The machine's already moving, and it's not stopping at Article 2. Their exchange, caught partially by a roaming press mic, went viral within the hour. Millions looped the clip. The caption: "She's not aiming for the man, she's aiming for the mechanism." By sunset, newsrooms called it the Tuesday realignment. Conservative commentators, once staunch defenders of executive muscle, began changing tone. You can't scream about law and order Monday and bypass Congress Tuesday. On social media, a new hashtag surged. # Restore the Vote college campuses held flash teach-ins. Civics professors became overnight celebrities. TikTok exploded with 60-second explainers on Article 1. The American public wasn't just marching now, they were studying. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Trump's team scrambled. His inner circle debated damage control, but every strategy leaked within hours. Discord, distraction, denial, none stuck. Because this wasn't a scandal, it was a reckoning. That night, the Senate agreed, by bipartisan vote, to hold a full inquiry into the legality of the Iran strike. Unprecedented, on camera, prime time. AOC didn't celebrate. She walked out of the Capitol quietly and left a note taped to her office door. You don't fight fire with fire, you fight it with the rule of law. Down the hall, a junior staffer whispered to another, she didn't light the match, but she's making sure the Constitution holds the extinguisher. They didn't speak at first. They glanced. They shuffled papers. Some avoided each other's eyes. But by noon, the dam cracked. Senator Langston, Republican, 3 terms, known for hawkish speeches and red-tie discipline, stood on the Senate floor with a tone not even his staff recognized. I've supported our military every day of my public life, but this wasn't what we voted for. This wasn't discussed. This wasn't constitutional. This wasn't America. C-SPAN cut mid-broadcast to go live. Within minutes, 6 other Republicans had echoed him. The New York Times ran the headline before the ink dried. GOP fractures on war strike, power versus process. Outside the chamber, the Capitol steps filled again with signs. Not just anti-war banners this time, but slogans aimed directly at power. Democracy isn't a loophole. Checks and balances, not blank checks. If they can skip Congress, they can skip us. Inside, the mood was raw, calculated, historic. AOC didn't grandstand. She didn't gloat. She requested something far more lethal than applause. I move that the Senate and the House jointly review the scope, abuse, and precedent of executive war powers. Fully, immediately. The room stilled. The motion wasn't loud, but it cut through like blade to glass. Senator Culver, normally a staunch defender of the president, tried to wave it off. This feels reactive, emotional. Let's not turn national security into a media cycle. AOC responded, not with volume, but precision. If accountability is reactive, then what is unchecked authority? If oversight is emotional, then what do you call missiles sent without a vote? She didn't need to say Trump. Everyone already heard his name in every syllable. What followed wasn't chaos. It was choreography. Staffers scrambled to count possible swing votes. Phone lines burned from Kansas to Maine. And in the basement press pit, someone whispered, "This isn't about Iran anymore. This is about the Constitution bleeding on live TV." During a recess, the Senate cafeteria buzzed with rumors. One aide dropped a folder on the table, unnamed but unmistakable. It read, Review Protocol, Presidential Military Actions, Precedent Summary, 1945 to present. AOC sat alone at a corner table, reading, not scanning, studying. That's when J.D. Vance walked over. He didn't look smug. He didn't look angry. He looked like someone staring at the future, his, the Senate's, the country's, and realizing it was already rewriting itself. He leaned in. No cameras, no reporters. This is going to destroy him. She looked up, calm, centered. He built it on silence. I'm just holding up the mic. That quote wouldn't make headlines, but the tremor it left behind would. By afternoon, the momentum shifted from debate to momentum. Independent senators requested inclusion in the review committee. One Republican announced his support for AOC's motion via tweet. This isn't about sides, it's about standards. If we can't say no to war without consent, we don't deserve these seats. Fox News called it fracture. MSNBC called it reckoning. Twitter just called it #the split. By 6 p.m., the Speaker's office confirmed it. The House will participate in the joint review. The war powers discussion is not hypothetical. It is historical. The sky outside turned gold over the Capitol, but inside the air was steel. And still, AOC didn't spike the moment. She quietly returned to her office, past a young staffer frozen in front of a TV. Congresswoman, J.D. Vance's quote is trending. Everyone's talking about what you said back. She didn't respond immediately. Then she paused, turned and said, "We're not here to trend. We're here to trace the truth back to where it was broken and repair it out loud." That night, The Atlantic released a late editorial. Its title captured the mood perfectly. "The day the Senate remembered it had a spine." The chamber wasn't full, yet it felt heavier than war. A special joint hearing had been convened, and everyone knew why. But no one wanted to say it first. The chair banged the gavel once. Cameras clicked into silence. AOC sat in the second row, her fingers interlaced, jaw still, eyes locked forward. Not on the speaker, not on the opposition, but on the digital screen above. The screen lit up, not with live footage, but with ghosts. March 2003, House floor, Iraq vote. A reel played, speeches from both parties, fierce debates, pages being turned, roll calls being cast. The weight of democracy in motion, even if it had later been called a mistake, it was a mistake made with procedure, with debate, with a vote. Then it cut to black, followed by January 2025, no roll call. No debate, no congressional record. Silence louder than any explosion. A murmur swept the room. Then a staffer handed the clerk a sealed transcript. The chair read, "There is no record of a formal vote authorizing military action on Iranian soil within the 72 hours prior to the strike." The room didn't gasp. It froze. AOC stood, not by request, not for drama, but because it was time. "So what are we pretending now?" she said. "That war can be a press release? That missiles fly faster than the Constitution?" Cameras turned. So did the attention of every major newsroom. "We have rules not because they're convenient, but because power without rules is not leadership. It's monarchy in camouflage." Senator Brannigan tried to interject. There were emergency conditions, intelligence briefings, but AOC raised a single finger. Not in anger, in evidence. And yet not one of those briefings included a call for vote. Not one. Because they didn't want a vote. They wanted a loophole. The hearing erupted. Some objected, some clapped, some left. But she wasn't finished. We have veterans in this room who wore the weight of their vote in 2003. Right or wrong, they stood in the light of process. But this administration, it acted in the dark, with fire, with zero consent, and with zero consequence until today. The hearing chair called for order. He didn't get it. The feed went viral within minutes. TikTok turned her words into a loop. Power without process is monarchy in camouflage. Colleges across the country paused lectures to stream the hearing. CNN changed its banner to "No vote, no consent. Now what?" In the hallway, protesters chanted something new. Roll call, not war call. Meanwhile, Trump's press office released a rushed statement. The president acted within his Article 2 powers to protect American lives. End of story. But it wasn't the end. It was ignition. Inside the chamber, another clip played. It showed a map. 3 strikes. 0 warnings. 0 congressional notification. AOC looked up again. There's a difference between acting fast and acting alone. Another pause. One that dared the room to breathe. Then she delivered the sentence that would lead the Washington Post the next day. If we don't check him now, who checks the next? Even those who didn't agree didn't interrupt. The moment wasn't political anymore. It was generational, historical, viral. One veteran lawmaker, a Democrat from Virginia, stood slowly and said, "I was here in 2003. I remember the weight of the button. But I remember the vote more, because we owed the country that." J.D. Vance, arms folded, whispered to no one in particular, "And now we owe them something louder." Outside, a high school civics teacher rewrote his next day's lesson plan. At the Capitol fence, a sign read, "We didn't elect a king." Later that evening, AOC didn't speak to reporters. She didn't need to. Her clip had already reached 11 million views. It would double by dawn. The final frame from the hearing was poetic, a digital screen that once showed missiles. Now flickering back to the words of the Constitution, it started with a subpoena. Simple, clean, undeniable. Delivered by hand to Mar-a-Lago, the document bore the seal of the House Committee on War Powers Oversight. No press release, no spin, just a sentence stamped in bold. You are hereby summoned to testify under oath regarding the initiation of hostilities without congressional authorization. Trump didn't respond publicly at first, but behind the scenes his legal team went into crisis mode. They filed motions, claimed executive privilege, blamed partisan theater, claimed AOC was weaponizing history, but the court calendar was already shifting and the hearing date was set. CNN broke the headline at 4:42 p.m. Trump to testify live, war powers under fire. Wall Street paused. Cable shows exploded. Twitter combusted. Hashtag Trump testifies trended alongside hashtag 13 words and hashtag this is not a drill. The Capitol prepared for what officials called a level 3 lockdown. That meant rooftop security. That meant concrete barriers. That meant a nation bracing for a political earthquake. Inside her office, AOC sat reviewing her notes. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She underlined one line from the Constitution again. The Congress shall have power to declare war, not suggest, not debate afterward, declare. Outside, protesters clashed in chants. Honor the vote. Defend the strike. No crown, no king, no war without a ring. The Senate Sergeant-at-Arms released an internal memo. Expect historic tensions. Maintain decorum at all costs. J.D. Vance passed her a message on folded paper. He's going to try to turn this into a circus. Don't blink. AOC scribbled one reply. Circus or not, the law is still the tent. Trump's lawyers held a press conference 2 days before the hearing. The president will not be intimidated by radical activists masquerading as lawmakers, one of them said. No one mentioned AOC by name, but the subtext screamed. That night, AOC did not issue a statement. She visited a local school in D.C. instead, one where students had written letters addressed to the lady who protected our right to say no. One letter stood out. It read, "My dad is in the military. He says rules matter most when you're scared." AOC folded it carefully and placed it in her jacket pocket. The next morning, Fox News showed aerial views of barricades around Capitol Hill. MSNBC showed archival footage of Nixon. TikTok was flooded with memes. We had the drama. Now we get the deposition. Every major outlet confirmed it. For the first time in American history, a former president would face direct congressional questioning over unauthorized war. Trump boarded a government jet. His tie was red, his face was unreadable, but the public was anything but calm. Subway screens flashed the countdown. Anchors whispered in reverence. Students watched in auditoriums. Veterans gathered in bars, fingers crossed or fists clenched. Twitter melted into one word: tomorrow. And the Capitol, it didn't sleep. Metal detectors hummed through the night. C-SPAN rehearsed angles. Congressional aides reviewed procedure. And in one corner office, a woman stared out the window, that student letter in her hand. She didn't rehearse. She didn't grandstand. She whispered 5 words to herself: make the Constitution speak louder. And for the first time in decades, America seemed ready to listen. The hearing room didn't breathe. Not when he walked in. Not when the gavel dropped. And especially not when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez rose from her seat. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence carried something heavier than volume. Trump sat flanked by 2 attorneys, one hand loosely gripping the microphone, the other twitching at his notes. But the page in front of AOC wasn't a script. It was the statute. She looked up, steady, centered. "Mr. Trump," she began, her voice even, unwavering, "did you knowingly bypass Section 4 of one of the War Powers Resolution, which mandates reporting to Congress within 48 hours of introducing armed forces into hostilities? No grandstanding, just the law." Trump blinked, then smirked. "We acted swiftly. There wasn't time to play politics." She didn't flinch. "This isn't about politics," she replied. "This is about process, about power, and whether you believe you're above both." The room tensed. Members of Congress leaned forward. Reporters tapped frantically. "Why?" she continued. "Did you act without consulting the Committee on Foreign Affairs? the intelligence community, or, at minimum, the Gang of Eight? Trump shifted. We had intelligence that required urgent. AOC raised her hand slightly, not to interrupt, but to end the dance. Mr. Trump, this isn't theater. This is testimony. I'll remind you that misleading Congress is a federal offense. Then came the moment. She reached under her binder, clicked a small remote. From the chamber's sound system came a clear male voice, his voice. We can't wait for votes. We strike now, or we look weak. Gasps rippled across the chamber. A few lawmakers instinctively turned their heads toward the audio feed, as if expecting more. AOC let the silence linger. Then, "Is this your voice, Mr. Trump?" No answer. "Was that decision coordinated with legal counsel?" Still no answer. She leaned in slightly, just enough to command, not beg, attention. "Because if this is your voice, and if what we've just heard represents your rationale, then we are not discussing a response to an immediate threat. We're discussing a breach of protocol, of restraint, of law." Trump's lawyer finally cut in, invoking national security. But the damage was done. The recording wasn't classified. It wasn't redacted. It was real. And it echoed through the marble like thunder. On the live stream, millions watched with jaws clenched. Cable networks replayed the 9-second clip on loop. TikTok clips cut to Gen Z captions. She brought receipts. And then came her closer, sharp as steel, soft as consequence. You were warned by the Pentagon, by precedent, by principle. And yet you moved forward, not because you had to, but because you could. This isn't about strength. It's about discipline. And the day we trade constitutional oversight for ego is the day the American experiment ends in applause. She sat, no eruption, no chaos, just the weight of accountability hanging in the air like smoke after a blast. Across the room, J.D. Vance whispered to a colleague, "He just lost the center." The chairman called a recess. But America didn't pause. Social media lit up with one sentence: "We can't wait for votes." That phrase, so casually said, became a rallying cry against unilateral war. AOC didn't do a press conference. She walked into a side hallway, hugged a staffer, and whispered, "One line can change the current." That was the line. And for the first time in weeks, the Capitol didn't feel like a place ruled by spectacle. It felt like a place where truth could still pierce noise. The clip played only once, but that was all it took. The phrase, "We can't wait for votes," echoed off the chamber walls like a detonation. Within minutes, hashtags ignited. #, no votes, no war. #, this is the line. #, AOC vs. Trump. The hearing room surged past 30 million live viewers, breaking every C-SPAN and YouTube political live stream record. And in the center of it all, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did not smile. She didn't gloat. She simply turned her gaze to the man across from her, the former president who had launched missiles without a mandate, and asked what no one else dared frame in such brutal clarity. This was never about Iran. It was about control, about bypassing a system because it slows you down, about declaring speed more patriotic than restraint. Trump leaned back, his arms folded, but the silence didn't favor him. It exposed him. "You didn't just dismiss a vote," she continued. "You dismissed every citizen behind it. You didn't just ignore process. You made a mockery of it." Gasps, even from the Republican side of the aisle. The chairman started to gavel, but paused. No one interrupted her now. "We were told this was about defense, but your own voice said it wasn't. You said, 'We can't wait for votes,' not because of incoming danger, but because of inconvenience." She held up a small card, not a speech, a name. Lieutenant Daniel Ruiz, 24 Texas, killed during the initial raid in Iran. His family received no warning, no explanation, just a folded flag. She set the card down slowly, deliberately. "You took war out of Congress and into your own hand, and you held it like a match." From the corner of the press gallery, a Fox News correspondent whispered into her mic, "She brought fire," without yelling once. CNN flashed a split screen, AOC calm, Trump visibly tense. And then came the pivot, not just in narrative, but in history. This isn't partisan. This isn't left versus right. This is a line, and either we redraw it or we let it vanish forever. Behind her, the mural of the Capitol dome gleamed under the ceiling lights. It had seen scandals. It had heard lies. But today it bore witness to something else. A reckoning built not on volume, but precision. Viewers around the world were no longer passive. Students replayed her words in classrooms. Veterans commented on live streams. She's saying what we bled for. Even foreign policy scholars tweeted, "This moment will be studied." And when a reporter shouted during break, "Congresswoman, do you think you just ended his 2028 run?" She didn't stop walking. She turned only to say, "I'm not here to end his career. I'm here to defend the Constitution." On the screen behind her, pollsters showed a 14-point drop in Trump's favorability within 1 hour. Independents swung hard. Even some conservatives posted, "I didn't vote for her, but today she spoke for me." The story led every headline. The Guardian, AOC cracks the doctrine of force. The Wall Street Journal, subpoena turns into standoff, and she held the line. Even the New York Post conceded, she made the chamber hers. And in neighborhoods across the country, where flags waved not just in loyalty but in grief, families of service members began asking, if they don't vote, why should we fight? Because in that room, AOC hadn't just exposed a breach. She had drawn a map back to what democracy was meant to be. It was the kind of morning the Capitol hadn't seen in half a century. Security checkpoints buzzed before dawn. Members of Congress filed in with visible tension. Journalists whispered about last-minute flips. Protesters gathered on the steps, silent, holding signs that didn't shout, but asked, "Will Congress finally speak?" The floor was packed. At 9:06 a.m., the clerk read the title, "The War Powers Reinforcement Act of 2025, an amendment to re-anchor executive military action back to the Constitution, mandatory briefings, time-limited engagements, congressional approval required for escalation. No president, current or future, could bomb first and ask later." The chamber froze. Then the votes began, one by one. Not like a thunderclap, but like a slow, inevitable drumbeat. Yay! Yay! Nay! Yay! Yay! And then something happened no one predicted. A Republican from Oklahoma rose and broke ranks. Then a senator from Florida, then another from Kansas. Each had previously defended the president's strike. But today, each said, yay. One explained afterward, "I didn't vote against Trump. I voted for the Constitution I swore to protect." By 10:17 a.m., the count flashed across the screens. Senate, 66 to 34. House, 312 to 123. The act passed. Gasps, tears, cheers. Protesters outside broke their silence with a thunderous chant. Law, lives, again. It was the first bipartisan war powers reform in over 50 years. The moment was captured on every network. MSNBC called it a seismic shift. Fox's Kyron read, "Congress leashes the commander-in-chief." Even C-SPAN, usually stoic, trended with a single-word caption beneath the vote, "Precedent." Inside the chamber, AOC sat still, hands folded, lips pressed. She didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. Instead, she turned to the young staffer beside her and said quietly, "That's how you rewrite a page in history, without erasing the rest." Later, she addressed the press. No podium theatrics, no finger-pointing. This vote wasn't about left versus right. It was about process versus impulse, about principles that outlive presidents. One journalist asked, "Do you think this weakens America's defense posture?" She didn't flinch. It strengthens our democratic one. Across the country, reactions poured in. At a cafe in Phoenix, a veteran raised his glass and said, "That girl from the Bronx just did what no general could." She held the line. Colleges paused classes to live stream the final vote. In a high school civics class in Des Moines, students stood and clapped. On TikTok, a remix of AOC's, quote, "Principles that outlive presidents," hit 1 million plays in 5 hours. It was political history reborn as pop culture. Meanwhile, the White House was quiet. Sources said Trump was livid. His legal team released a statement calling the act unnecessary grandstanding. But privately, even some senior advisors admitted the optics were devastating. In a group chat leaked from a campaign staffer, one message stood out. She made him look like a dictator, and she did it with a ballot. Back on the Capitol steps, a woman in her 60s held a sign that read, "I was here in '73. I never thought I'd see this again." Reporters flocked. She didn't cry. She just said, "That Nixon moment?" This felt bigger, because this time, the people didn't have to march for months. One woman read the law, and Congress finally listened. In the days that followed, support for the vote surged. A Gallup poll showed 68% of Americans supported the act, including 56% of Republicans. The phrase "war powers reinforcement" was Googled more in one day than in the last decade combined. And at a law school in Michigan, the dean began his lecture with a quote, "Checks and balances don't scream. They sign, they pass, they endure." On Capitol Hill, one aide was overheard muttering, "She didn't just win a vote, she reset the clock." And perhaps that's what made it unforgettable. Because in a time of loud politics and louder personalities, one of the most watched moments of 2025 wasn't a viral clip. It was a line on a vote count, a tick in a column, a return to what was always supposed to matter. Not ego, not fear, just law. And the people who finally remembered how to use it. The ripple wasn't slow, it was seismic. Just hours after Congress passed the War Powers Reinforcement Act, Iran's foreign ministry issued a rare midnight statement. "We acknowledge the shift. Retaliatory measures are suspended pending U.S. internal resolution. No missiles, no parades." Just a pause. The world held its breath and slowly exhaled. From Brussels, the European Union released a joint declaration. "We commend the U.S. Congress for demonstrating democratic discipline in a moment where others might choose domination." The BBC called it a legislative lightning strike. Al Jazeera said, "Capitol Hill just reminded the world who holds the pen." But not everyone stayed silent out of respect. At 5:42 a.m., Trump tweeted in all caps, "Congress stabbed me with paperwork." The internet exploded. Memes flooded in. One viral image showed a golden pen labeled "Oath of Office," piercing a cartoon crown. Hashtag #, paper cuts power trended for 11 hours. AOC responded within minutes. No flourish. No dig. Just one sentence beneath a screenshot of his tweet. "That paper is the oath you swore." It was retweeted 2.1 million times by Sunrise. In classrooms from Berlin to Bangkok, political science professors rewrote their lecture slides overnight. International law experts debated whether this moment marked a new phase in U.S. constitutional enforcement. But in New York, at the same vigil where a Gold Star mother once handed AOC a dog tag, the woman returned. This time she brought her daughter. They lit 2 candles. And as the crowd recited part of the Constitution aloud, the young girl asked her mom, "Did they fix it?" The mother whispered back, "They remembered it." In a quiet moment inside the Capitol's halls, a young student from D.C. steps forward and hands AOC a pocket-sized Constitution. "You didn't just protect the law," the girl says softly. "You protected us." AOC's eyes well with pride and determination. "You're why I fought," she replies with a powerful smile. The scene fades as AOC places the newly signed War Powers Act into the Library of Congress. A symbol not just of law restored, but of hope rekindled. This is more than politics. It's a legacy written by courage and conviction. The fight continues, fueled by those who dare to stand. Across the country, bells rang, but this time, it wasn't for math or lunch. It was Democracy Day. In a high school auditorium in Des Moines, rows of students sat cross-legged, eyes fixed on a projector screen. The lights dimmed. A grainy clip played. A hearing room, tense. Then came the line, "If Congress doesn't declare war, who does?" 13 words. No theatrics. No raised voice. Just clarity. And a chill that ran through every row. In a civics class in Atlanta, a student raised her hand and said, "I thought laws were just background noise." Her teacher paused, then replied, "That was the day America listened to its laws again." In Boston, students reenacted the hearing. One girl wore a blazer, stood behind a cardboard desk, and read from the War Powers Resolution like it was scripture. Her classmates didn't laugh. They applauded. Social media lit up with clips of classrooms nationwide. Teachers posted chalkboards titled, "What is Strength?" One reply stood out beneath a clip. "My daughter just asked me what oath means. I told her it means remembering what matters, especially when no one else does." PBS NewsHour's studio was quiet. The host leaned in. "Would you do it again?" AOC didn't flinch. "Yes, because silence isn't strength, it's surrender." The room didn't erupt. It held its breath. She looked straight into the camera. "Not for drama, for record. People think I was fighting a man. I wasn't. I was fighting amnesia. I was fighting the idea that we can skip process when it's inconvenient. That legality is optional. That power only listens to volume. No, it listens to consequence." She exhaled, not from fatigue, but from conviction. The Constitution isn't supposed to be a relic. It's supposed to be a referee. The interviewer blinked, surprised. "Even with the risks," AOC nodded. "Especially with the risks. You don't protect a system by waiting for its collapse. You protect it by interrupting the silence just before the fall." A pause, then one final line. "I wasn't the first to ask hard questions, but I might have been the first in a long time to make sure America didn't skip the answer." The sun sets over Washington. The Capitol dome glows in golden shadow. Slow camera pan. No music yet, just ambient wind, birds, the hum of history. Then a voice, measured and low, breaks in. She didn't shout. She didn't blame. She asked the question no one dared. And when silence fell, America finally heard itself. The screen fades to black. One last line appears in white text. "When missiles spoke first, the Constitution whispered last, and still won." Pause. If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Alexandria Rising Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Alexandria Rising Stories.